Hey guys, welcome back to part 2 of our steering segment. In this video we're going to conclude the final assembly process of our steering system, working from the rack and pinion unit all the way up through our steering column, going through the dash, and finishing off with our steering wheel. Also we're going to go over the horn button and trim ring there. First thing I want to talk about before we put this guy in, let's go over these turn signal levers, see what we have to do to get those out of there and get those re-chromed. Most of this unit's already been rebuilt and reconditioned, so this is really the only thing really that we need to go in detail. Let's take a look at that first. So let's have a look at the left lever first. This one is the most complicated. Please bear with me on the light here. I'm trying to hold a light, screwdriver, and move this thing around at the same time. So how to get this lever out of here. It's got a rivet through this area here and roll it over. And you can see on this side, right here, what I did is I ground off one side of the rivet and then pulled it. Looks like a pin. You can see that going through there. And then that basically enables this lever to be removed. However, it tucks in this little plastic piece right here, and this left lever, and get the light in there, inside this plastic piece there is a like a shaft with a couple of balls on each end, and what that's designed to do is to pivot up and down as we actuate the lever. You can see if I can, let's see if I can see in there. You can see that shaft. See that thing moving up and down in there. Okay, so I'm going to put a picture in here to show you what that piece looks like disassembled. Most difficult part of this process is putting that piece back in there. Took me and my dad, put this left and right switch back together about 4 hours using a jeweler's light, 2 pairs of hands, some miniature pliers, a magnifying glass, and some lighting. Two-man job. You're going to have to be real patient with it. Very, very tedious. At one point I didn't think I was going to be able to get it back in there, but it is possible. You can do it. I wouldn't recommend taking this lever off of here unless you absolutely have to, or you're real good with your hands in small detail. Okay, let's put a picture in there, take a look at that, and we'll move over to the right side. Alright, looking at the right lever then, so you can see here, same thing, grind off the head of one side of the rivet using a die grinder. Got the head on one side, we've lost it on the other. However, that pin is a very specific diameter to make everything work and function properly, so we need to reuse that pin. What I'm going to do is just pull them both out of there, clean them with some denatured alcohol, slide them back in there, and then cement them in with some JB weld. That should be fine. This is just basically pinned in there. We just need to stop it from falling out. Doesn't have any other real stresses or forces against it. I found using a JB weld in these sort of situations works a lot better than a super glue. Super glue has a tendency to fail under high temperatures, so JB weld really working best in these kind of reattachments. So while our JB's setting up, let's take our coupling outside, go ahead and mount this to the rack and pinion. All I've done is pulled the 2 bolts here. I've got a new safety washer on this side. These will be torqued down to 18.1 pounds. I'll put a little Loctite on there. And then also on the shaft we have a bearing and bushing combination. This is the original off the car. Rubber is still really excellent condition, so I'm going to go ahead and reuse it. So what I've done, just cleaned it up inside, got the bearings all cleaned up in there. I'm going to repack that with silicone grease, slide that guy over onto here, and then assemble it. So let's go outside, take a look at that, and see how that works. So back out at the car, taking a look at the top side of our rack and pinion. This is where the coupling is going to go. You can see here, just need to bolt that on there, but I'm real limited for room here, guys, to set up a tripod. No problem though, just 2 bolts. That bolts down in there, 18.1 pounds. There is one thing the manual does bring attention to, and that is making sure that if you're using these lock tabs, that nothing is protruding past this rubber area, because it's real tight in there, and you could end up with something rubbing right here, right in this area here, which would create some friction, some problems steering. So you want to make sure nothing's sticking out. Let me go ahead and bolt this down. We'll take a look, see what that looks like. And then to torque this down, we're going to have to lock it in somehow. I'm using a vice grips here to hold on to while I'm pulling in reverse direction with the torque, and that seems to work okay. So we have to lock it down with something, otherwise when you start torquing, it's going to turn. So just double checking our tabs are pounded down nice and flush, nothing sticking out there. Then we're going to slide our dust cover over. So dust cover slides in, no problem. So next we'll pack our bearing and slide our bushing into place. And then packing our bushing. So what I'm doing is putting just a little bit of grease on that front edge, so when it sits down in this plastic boot here, a little lubrication, that'll help to seal it also. Let me press that in there, see what that looks like. That one slipped into place, no problem. So now it's nice and seated. So we've got a good seal in here. I'm going to put the retaining cap on and torque those bolts down to 18 pounds. Okay, everything fit together real good there. So 18 pounds torque on those, and then underneath that bolt you're going to want to use a spring washer or a wave type washer. That's what it specs out for that. And all greased up inside, looking good. Okay, let's take a look at our steering post. So steering post was put in a few months ago. I had my brother Ken help me put this in. This is a two-man job to put this guy in here. And what makes it a two-man job is the difficulty of this grommet seal up here where it goes into the body. I couldn't find any way possible, even with lubricant, to put the seal on the post and slide it into the body. It wasn't possible. So I had my brother Ken working the inside, rolling the post around while I was underneath the dash from the inside with a screwdriver and just kind of pressing the seal in place. Let's go underneath the dashboard and I'll show you the order we put that in there. Okay, let me see if I can describe this as best I can. So what we did is we pushed the post in to about here. At that point I then slid the grommet over the post, and then we pushed the post all the way through the dashboard here. Once we're up front here, then I took the rubber grommet and slid it back to the body here. You're going to need rubber grease around the steering post, and you're going to need rubber grease on the inside of the grommet in order to squeeze this guy in here. So Ken was pulling and rolling and twisting the steering post while I'm pushing and working this grommet, just kind of massaging it into place. Real difficult to put in there. Just got to be patient with it. Lots of grease. Definitely a two-man job, but it is doable. Just got to be careful not to press too hard with that screwdriver, or you could damage the rubber. All right, let's go around and look at the front and see how that bolts down. So looking at the front here where we bolted down, so I'm using the original rubber grommets that were in place when I pulled this off the car. Condition of that rubber, also excellent condition. They were embossed with the washers being driven down into there and sitting for so many years, so it was easy for me to relocate exactly where this is positioned. It is possible to slide this post forward and backwards to some degree with adjustment if you're putting new bushings in there. What the manual wants is they want the position of this post to be 2 millimeters clearance from the column of the dash hitting the dashboard. So let's go in and take a look at that spec and see what that looks like. So let's take a look at that 2 millimeters they're talking about. So what they're referring to is the distance between our housing here, backside of our housing, to the face of the dashboard, our aluminum trim. They want at least 2 millimeters in here. What's going to happen, we're going to slide this housing inside the steering post. It's going to bottom out against this edge. If the steering post is too far in towards the trunk, we're going to be touching here, which means we need to pull it in towards the cab enough to give us 2 millimeters of space here. That'll make more sense when we get this slid in. Show you a little bit closer what we're talking about there, but that's basically what's going on. Contact point and 2 millimeters space. All right, levers are in place. This is pretty much what it should look like from the front view. Making sure we don't get the left one on the right side and vice versa. Also, we got 3 ground wires going through here. We got a medium length one. This particular one is going to ground to the housing, little ground tab right there. I took that one off to do our paint job, and what that is just placed on there and then peened over. So if you take yours off, you'll have to repaint it, and a little JB on there wouldn't hurt, just to secure it a little bit better. The long wire is going to pass through the column. That one's going to go to your cigarette lighter, and then the short one to our horn button. And then 2 nuts, one top, one bottom, secures the 2 halves together. So then to replace or repack our front rear bearing set, we'll need to pull the shaft out of here. That just comes forward. We need to remove, there's one rear retainer clip here. That just pops off of there. Shaft drifts forward, and then your bearings, rear bearings are setting in there. To get those out, there's just one retainer clip here. So pull those out, repack or replace as needed. And then our rear bushing seal goes into the steering post. This guy here, this is our original. Looks pretty beat up. Some kind of a wax type composite they used to use for that. They just pretty much crumble once you take them out of there. New replacement seals are rubber, so a little bit better. One retainer clip here with a washer, and one retainer clip here with a washer. Real simple to put that on. So then there's a couple more things that are critical to setting this guy up before we put it in the car. One thing is the distance between the face of this inner tubing to the face of our housing here. This distance has to be 7 millimeters. And the reason that is the more forward it is, the more off the column your steering wheel is going to be. If it's too far back in, your steering wheel is going to be rubbing here. So we're going to set that up right at 7 millimeters. Then also in line with the center axis of our housing, we have this notch in this area here. This is for a steering lock. This particular car wasn't equipped with a steering lock, but that'll be punched in there, and that should be in line with our housing. So let's set that up as 7 millimeters, see what that looks like. Okay, there we are right there. Hopefully you can see that. 7 millimeters, face to face. Okay, I think we're ready to go here. So what we want to do, we just want to hook up one U-joint set onto the steering column, separated at our steering shaft, also known as the intermediate shaft. Okay, so let's take this guy outside. We'll slide the wires through the dashboard and drop her in the hole. Okay, just kind of getting everything in position here before we slide down in there. Okay, slide that guy in there. And then pushing our wires through the dashboard. Okay, now we got those in position. Let's go ahead and slide her back. Okay, she's in. Let's take a look at that pin in there. So what's going to happen now that that pin is recessed, we'll just slide this clamp over it and tighten her up. Next, let's install the intermediate shaft and bushing. So what's going to happen here, the front section here, this is going to go into the U-joint coming out of the steering column. We have one bolt here. Also, the manual specs out the use of these external lock washers behind the head of the nut. When I took the car apart originally, it had nylocks on there. I'm replacing those, but it did not have any of these lock washers. Why didn't it have those? Could have been a couple of reasons. Car might have been serviced at some point and they never made it back on there, or they never made it on there from the factory, or they added those at some other date and time. Sometimes when you restore these old cars, things make it on from the factory, some things don't make it on. Some things get lost. Servicing, you don't know what the guys take off, what they put back on. So it's really hard to get a 100% complete car and follow it back to its original path completely. So really we got to rely on manuals, as many photographs, and also input from other Porsche specialists that might know something we don't know. Okay, so what we're going to do, put the front in there, then we're going to move on down to the bottom side. This side where it goes into the coupling, there's actually an elongated slot to pass our bolt through there. The bottom side here, this actually has a little room for adjustment. Let's take this outside and slide her in. Okay, just kind of getting things aligned and in position here. So you can see the indent here. This is where the bolt is going to pass through here. We're going to go in there and then take up that space. However, to get this guy completely in place before we bolt it down, we're going to have to push this shaft all the way forward as far as it'll go. We come back to the rear here. You can see it's not going to quite pivot into place there. So need to pull these two bolts back out. That way we can roll this guy into position there. You can also see the elongation area here for our bolt. So let me pull those two bolts out of there and get that thing pressed on. Alright, that worked out real good. So sometimes one step forward, two steps back. No problem though. So retorquing these bolts to 18 pounds. Our steering U-joints, 25.3 pounds. That'll be all the way up through the U-joints. And then I couldn't find anything in the manual referring to our felt bushing in here and how to deal with that. So all this is original rubber, felt in really good condition, just cleaned up. So what's going on here, that's just basically a guide for our steering shaft here. Take up some of the wiggle or some of the vibration coming up the shaft. And it also has this cap that goes on top. That'll just snap into place. And it's just basically applying light pressure to this area here. So in my mind, no lubrication on that. Just put it in there dry. You should be good. Unless there's some guys out there that know something a little bit more about that, then I can find out. Maybe you could share that with us in the section down below. Okay, I'm just going to leave it here for now. We'll put the steering cap on here later in the build. So let's go in and take a look at that steering wheel and get that on. So looking at the back side of our steering wheel, so we've got one flange that screws down to the back side. It's got two screws here and here. Then here's our contact pin. That's going to push through from the front side. That's going to make contact so we have a horn. And then a little petroleum grease on the shaft in here, sliding over with our spring. And then sitting on top of our spring is going to be this guy here. This is basically a bearing sleeve that'll press inside the bearing. And then this piece here, we're going to go ahead and mount that to the steering column. So then let's just have a quick look at our switch levers before we cover it up and bring our steering wheel in here. So what I'm using for lubrication in here is this is a regular petroleum grease on all the sliding metal to metal actuating parts. That'd be on the left switch, and also the right side here. It's got like a ratchet gear in there. That'll need lubrication also. And then what I'm using for our electrical contacts for our copper to copper sliding action, I'm using a silicone dielectric grease. However, you don't want to use a silicone dielectric grease for any of these moving parts here, because what's going to happen, everything's going to seize up. It's kind of a weird physics thing. I'm not really sure how that works, but petroleum grease in these areas is going to work best. So making sure our ground wire is plugged in before we press it in there. And then I'm just finding out that in this area here, it really works better with a little petroleum grease on there rather than a dielectric grease. A little bit too much pressure from our spring here, which makes it squeal if we use dielectric grease on there. Also a little petroleum grease on that edge there. Okay, let's slide around. Alright, so we got our wheel in place here. Let's take a look at that clearance behind there. Looks like we got at least 2 millimeters between the housing and the steering wheel. Also, I've got this center nut. It's just snug for now. I'm pretty sure we're going to be pulling this wheel on and off at least a half a dozen more times. But yeah, it feels real nice and smooth. Everything is snug. There's no wiggle or shimmy in there. Looked like everything worked out real good. And then last but not least, our horn ring assembly. So what I've done on the front side here, I've re-chromed this trim ring here. And what I'm finding out with Porsche, one of the amazing things about this car, working with it as long as I've worked with it, is the tolerances in which the Germans put this thing together. They work with such precise tolerances, such an exact fit. Even the process of painting this horn ring and re-chroming this trim ring, it's all I can do to fit these two pieces back together again once that process has been done. So they work in such tight tolerances. Just the buildup in chrome could give you fitment problems, and buildup in paint also. This whole leather assembly right here, this took me about 1 hour to massage that in there without damaging the trim ring. From the back side, what I'm doing here is I'm just marking the top section, put a little arrow on there, and then once you get everything massaged into place, just bend these tabs over and you should be good. Then we're going to go ahead and assemble the horn contact assembly here. This is what actually makes the contact to the horn button, and that's very specific in the order that goes together. So let's go ahead and assemble that next, see what that looks like. So first noted position is the up arrow and the pattern of our holes here. That's going to be up. And then I've gone ahead and marked, you can see the arrow in the direction that's going to go. We put our spacer washers on the back. This one's going to go here. And then our next level of spacers go here. And then this is the position of this piece. Noting the X there, this is going to be a grounding tab. It's going to insert in there. What it's used for, I have no idea. And these little inserts are going to pop in there. That's going to be the position right there. So after we get our inserts in place and our screw set down in, there's the position of our grounding tab. Just kind of a wiggle. I want to make sure everything's seated because all of this can move around to some degree. So I want to make sure everything bottoms out without pinching anything or getting cockeyed in there. And just snug is really all it needs. And then last we'll put our rubber spring in there. So this just presses down in this area here. Make sure that's seated. It's going to be all the way down in there. Alright, that looks good. And then just one smear coat of petroleum grease right here. And then one last close-up look, just see how everything sits together. Okay, let's take her outside and put her on. Rubber spring seems to be working real good. Okay, there she is. Let's just take a look at a couple of details here before we wrap this up. So, turn signal livers, what I've done here, put these plastic ends on. Wet contact cement over our shaft and then sliding over the plastic ends while the contact is still wet. What's going to happen, eventually the contact will dry out in there, and that'll create like a flexible rubber cement. If I ever need to pull these back off of here again, it should come off of there. If I use anything more rigid in there, any kind of cement more rigid than that, probably will damage or break these to get them back off. Also underneath here, this steering clamp and bolt here, this is the right position for this bolt. This will be torqued down to 18 pounds. It is possible to put this clamp on backwards, so be careful before sliding your column down into the dash that this is turned into the right side so that the bolt will tighten upwards. Otherwise it won't tighten down, it'll be hanging down below here and be bumping into your lower crash pad. Alright, so we got our steering finally under control. So what we're going to do from here, we're going to lower the car down to suspension height on this dolly. That's about a 9 3/4 inch drop from where it is. So I'm going to remove this top tier down to this section here. And how I'm going to do that, I'm going to get a couple of hands, one on each side of the car up front to balance it as I lift the rear down into this support pocket here. Once I drop to here, I'll be within 1 inch of the new dolly height. And that should get us within range of the ground to put our rear suspension on. We'll start with our rear suspension first, get the wheels on there, and then we'll move on up to the front. Well, that's going to do it for this video. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.